それでは続きまして、基調講演の2つ目、ポール・ステイシー氏の、講演に移りたいと思います。So, hi Paul. It's your part. So could you start your presentation?
Konnichiwa, everyone from Vancouver, Canada. I'm Paul Stacey, the Executive Director of Open Education Global, and it's my honor to be here with you from so far away, but participating in your event. Thanks so much for inviting me. So when Katsu invited me, I told him I would speak about the open education ecosystem and our organization's place in it. And this is a nice extension to what we just heard from Willem. So like him, I want to acknowledge the extremely odd time we're in. And like Willem, my staff has been busy helping institutions and our members around the world as they adjust and pivot to teaching online and to figuring out how to help students and teachers do that really well as supporting people working from home. And one of the things we've been enjoying exploring with everyone is the ways in which open education has been of great help in this time of pandemic. But I'm going to set that aside and move to a bigger perspective of what open education is. And as you can see from the title of my presentation, I've chosen to think about open education as an ecosystem, to think about a holistic view of that system and how the parts interact and the interrelationships between them and the interdependencies between them. And when we speak about an ecosystem, we're more often than not focused on how we can create and maintain a healthy ecosystem. So as I speak about open education in this context, think about the ways in which we are helping create an education system that can be maintained and be healthy through the use of openness. It's similar in some ways to a biological ecosystem where we have plants, animals, microorganisms interacting and making use of air, water, sun, and soil. And all of those components are interconnected, have a relationship and benefit one another, and are typically maintained in some kind of balance if we want to have a healthy ecosystem. I'm positing or suggesting that the same kind of idea can be applied to education, where we could think of it as an ecosystem, where we have students and educators and government and administrators working to provide teaching and learning, working to do research, to provide community service using infrastructure, whether that's physical infrastructure in the form of buildings or technological infrastructure in terms of open education technologies, learning management systems, and those kinds of things. And what I want to talk about today is how open affects every part of that education ecosystem that I just showed. Before I took on this job, I was asked to speak to the board about why I wanted to do this job as executive director and to share with them my view of the current landscape of open. And this is, I gave them one page, and this is the one page I gave them. And this one page, for me, conveys that ecosystem in one comprehensive diagram. I won't use this diagram as the basis for my talk today, except to say that there are some pieces to this diagram that I want to highlight right now before I move on. The diagram has a brown line at about the 1/3 mark up the page. And above that brown line are what I say are the growing components of open education. And below that brown line are the things that I suggest are germinating. This diagram is now 2 years old, but in many ways it's quite relevant, although some of the things that were below the line have now moved above the line as we see open education maturing. I want to talk about just one thing on this diagram, and that is the tree on the left that has the colored ovals that are attached to it. The ovals represent each of the forms of open education. Oops, I accidentally went forward. And so I'll just say that the ovals on that tree represent each of the forms of openness in education that are in play right now. And out of all of those, I want to highlight these three. So I'll just move on and say, these are the three areas of open education I want to focus on today. The teaching and learning part of the ecosystem, the research part of the ecosystem, and this notion of community service. And these three components of education all are being impacted by open education. And I want to talk briefly with you today about how that is happening. So for teaching and learning, here are the five main pieces of the ecosystem that I think are really in play in terms of open education. We heard Willem talk about open education resources, which I have in the top left. Open textbooks are a big form of open education resources, particularly in North America. MOOCs are big everywhere around the world, including, I know, in Asia. I want to touch briefly on what's called Open GLAM, with GLAM, the acronym, being standing for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. And then in the top right, I have something referring to the Open Pedagogy Notebook, which I think is perhaps the most impactful form of openness in education that is currently emerging. Let me talk about each of those in kind, just briefly. In terms of open education resources, there are now many, many different types of open education resources. In the top right, I have a couple of open textbooks that are coming from OpenStax for algebra and pre-algebra. In the bottom right are examples of open education resources from FET, and some of you I know were in Milano last year at our open education conference and heard Kathy Perkins speak about these. But these are not textbooks. These are interactive simulations that are used to teach physics, biology, chemistry, math, subjects like that. So we have a rich array of different kinds of teaching and learning materials that are all being developed as open education resources. And then in the bottom left, we have a big phenomenon that's happening, especially in North America right now, but increasingly elsewhere, which is the creation of a complete degree that is made up of open education resources. These are being called Z degrees in the United States or Z creds in Canada, where I am. And in these degrees, every single course is made up of open education resources, and the entire degree is a sequence of courses that are comprised of open education resources, lowering the total cost, especially in the North American context, for students to take those degrees. And then on the open education resource side, we also have how do you find these open education resources? And increasingly, that's being done using infrastructure that we refer to as repositories. I've put two screenshots on this slide showing two popular repositories, Skills Commons, which provides a lot of workforce-related open education resources for areas like information technology, energy, the trades, transportation, areas like that. And then OER Commons is the one at the bottom, which is a very popular source for finding open education resources and is also providing services for those who want to have their own custom-built repository. So increasingly, we're seeing a need to store open education resources and provide a means to quickly search across these repositories to surface the open education resources that are most relevant to us and have the potential for reuse and adaptation and remixing and repurposing, as Willem was describing. Textbooks have become a very big phenomenon. I mentioned OpenStax already in the bottom left. The Open Textbook Library is very interesting as an open education initiative in that it's targeting mostly librarians. And so it's formed a network of librarians across North America who are interested in creating a curated collection of high quality textbooks, not just the ones from OpenStax, but all of the open textbooks that are available. And the Open Textbook Library also provides an additional service of having faculty peer review those textbooks and assess and comment on their quality. And then here in Canada, my colleagues at BC Campus have also been generating a wide variety of open textbooks and have been receiving government funding to engage teams of faculty in co-authoring those textbooks together, typically for the high enrollment undergraduate courses that are available at colleges and universities in years 1 and 2, with the aim of reducing the costs students are having to bear to buy those textbooks and making it more affordable. And I saw actually just today, they reported that they've now saved students $18 million. On the MOOC side, I would say that many MOOCs are open in terms of enrollment, but not always open in terms of being open education resources. And so the MOOCs from TU Delft are really special in that regard, in that they are both open in terms of enrollment and also open in terms of being open education resources that can be reused and adapted by others. These are the big 3 platforms that I'm sure you've all had a look at, and I know some of you are using some of these platforms or have custom built your own platforms. I think MOOCs have proven to be quite exciting as a means of enabling access to education for many, many people who would not normally be able to take these courses. And I also know from some of the participation I've been having in MOOC events that all these platforms are increasingly focusing on the workforce and developing job skills and job readiness for the future fields of employment that we can expect going forward. On the galleries, libraries, archives, and museums front, I'm just going to reference one example, but there are now many, many examples of libraries, archives, and museums opening up their collection by openly licensing their artworks and their materials that are part of their collections in ways that allow the public to freely access those resources and allow educators to take those resources and embed them in the courses that they teach with. So we increasingly have a very high quality set of materials available from all these different sources, like the Rijksmuseum on this particular slide, that we can actually make use of in teaching and learning. And while I'm referencing galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, as we all probably know, there are many, many resources that have been openly licensed in the form of photographs or music, books of all kinds, videos. And so the pool of openly licensed resources that perhaps were originally created not for education purposes, but can be used by educators to create teaching and learning that is rich and engaging is becoming quite fantastic. I like this particular example because they also do an annual award where they have a competition, a design competition, challenging people to make use of images from their collection in real tangible works that often have commercial potential, such as the contact lens in the middle, or the beautiful kimono on the left, or the sleeping mask on the right. Perhaps the most exciting area, though, in the teaching and learning side is around pedagogy. This is referring to how we teach and how we engage our learners in learning. And with the introduction of open education, we're seeing a shift from the traditional practices of kind of rote learning and lecturing to other forms of student engagement and other forms of teaching. I've highlighted just a couple here on this slide just to introduce the concept. In the top left, I've referenced something called non-disposable assignments. This is referring to classical, normal kinds of assignments we give students where they have to show that they've acquired the knowledge, which they do through a multiple choice test or an essay or a short answer assignment, whatever it is. They hand that in, we mark it, we give them back and give them a grade. And then typically that assignment is done and over and it can be thought of as something that is disposed of. In the open education context, the pedagogy is shifting towards engaging students in assignments that generate long-lasting value. That can be engaging them in co-creating open education resources that will be used with subsequent students by a teacher, even contributing to the writing of some of these open textbooks. It can be contributing to writing Wikipedia articles that generate a public good in terms of benefiting everyone, and lots of other forms. There often are some really fascinating examples emerging now around having students do assignments that contribute solutions to the sustainable development goals that I've shown here on this slide that we heard Willem talk about. So that's what I want to say about teaching and learning. Now let's shift a little bit to research. And so I thought I'd highlight 3 of the ways that open education is impacting research, or openness in education. I think typically we think of, when we say open education, we think of the teaching and learning side, which we heard Willem talk a lot about as well, but we don't often think about the broader ecosystem of education. And I'm trying to highlight that today to show that openness in education is affecting all of the components of education, not just teaching and learning. So on the research side, the 3 of the ways that openness is impacting research are open access, open data, and open science. And these forms of openness in education are often siloed away from teaching and learning and involve totally different people. I'm calling for a greater integration of them so that we begin to see the interrelationships and interdependencies. On open access, we're really talking about how research gets published. And there are 2 ways that are being used to publish research in openly accessible ways: the gold open access, the green open access. I won't go through this diagram. I'm sure some of you are already familiar with these different forms of publishing. We're seeing a significant move away from proprietary closed journals that require subscription fees or require payment of money in order to download an article, to instead forms of research publishing that ensure the public has access to the research that it paid for without having to pay additional fees. This is becoming increasingly important even in the current context as we see a growing demand to have immediate free access to things like COVID-19 research. Or we're starting to see that demand start to surface around challenging and questioning the viability of the academic publishing business model and whether that will survive. We're even seeing unusual efforts to create components associated with providing support for the COVID-19 patients, like 3D printing valves that are necessary, that were no longer available, and doing so at a very low cost. But then we're also seeing sometimes those that hold the intellectual property to some of these things threatening those who are trying to create innovation around this with things like lawsuits. And the last area of research I want to touch on that has relation to openness in education is just the data side. Here I'm talking about open data. There's 2 big clusters of open data. One is around the data that's produced in research, so the data that underlies a research initiative. Is that data being made available as part of the published research in a way that is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable by others? This, of course, is important for validating that the research, in fact, is accurate and enabling people to replicate the results, and also for analyzing that research to build upon it. The other form of open data that we see a lot now is coming more from government and public service. So data about the weather, data about transportation systems, about pollution, all of these data points that we see our cities and our governments collecting on our behalf. To what extent is that data being made available in an open way that allows everyone to have access to it and to use it? And then finally on this slide, I identify a question that I think is emerging around open data, and that is increasingly in online education, there are learning analytics being used to track and improve student performance. But often the data that is being gathered about student activity is not actually open, and people are beginning to question the ethics of that and call for the data associated with learning analytics to also be open. And then finally, open science is kind of the integration of of open access and open data and the use of those kinds of practices to conduct scientific research along with a whole set of legal issues and data management issues. But more importantly, from my point of view, I really like the way open science is also engaging citizens in participating in scientific research. And this is a screenshot of an example of that having to do with engaging citizens in fold-it of proteins as part of a research initiative. So thinking about how to engage not just scholars in conducting science, but the public at large, and engaging them in a way that helps contribute to the advancement of science and research, I think is a really exciting aspect of open education. And then the third aspect of the ecosystem I wanted to mention or reference with my remarks here about open education is what I'm calling community service. This often is what is thought of as the third pillar of open education, the purpose of education in general. Teaching and learning, research, and community service benefit the community in which it's trying to produce educated citizenry. All of these forms of open education that Willem has talked about, that I'm talking about, are based on a set of shared common principles that underlie them. And those principles are really about benefiting the public, not just enrolled students. So we have things like access and participation and inclusion. These are all things that are underlying principles and underlying benefits that ensure that the public gets to benefit and that the institution that's practicing open education is providing a community service. We heard Willem talk about these 5 R's. I won't go into them again, but they are examples of some of those benefits and some of those ways in which a community service is being provided that benefits not just the teachers and students at an institution, but the public at large. So that's a little very fast surface skim of what's happening in open education. I could talk way more about it. But Katsu also asked me to speak about open education global, who we are, what our role is, and what's our function within this open education ecosystem. So as our name implies, we're global, we're a nonprofit, we're a member-based network. We have hundreds of members all around the world. We're always welcoming new members. We have a variety of categories of membership. Our traditional members have been more from higher education, but we last year expanded our membership categories to include primary and secondary, or what we might call K-12. And that will be a big area of focus for us this year, as we're beginning to see open education not only be something that's adopted and used by colleges and universities and higher education institutions around the world, but increasingly open education is now being something that's been being applied to the primary and secondary levels of education, and we'll be bringing on a new person actually as part of our team in June who will lead our efforts in this area. Our biggest value proposition in terms of an organization is the global perspective on open education. That's kind of unique to us as an organization. We're really the only organization that's focused on open education and focused on that in a global context. Our primary role is around building community and connecting members to each other. We do that by convening and running events. We do that by offering all kinds of special activities at both the grassroots level of working directly with teachers and faculty and instructional designers, but also at the senior administration level at working with leaders, even government people around things like policy, for example, related to open education. We do a lot of advocacy and awareness raising. We do some curating, communicating, and showcasing. We do a lot of facilitating and matchmaking. This picture to the right shows some of the members we have all around the world, and the colored lines represent special regional nodes that we have. Here are the big events that we do every year. We do Open Education Week, which is a week-long virtual event. It actually just concluded at the beginning of March, that invites everyone from around the world to host local events or do virtual events that showcase and describe their open education work. And we provide a platform where all of that is aggregated and hosted every year. We give out open education awards. We run a global conference, and we have 2 regional nodes currently. This regional node activity is an area of growth for us. We currently have a Community College Consortium for Open Education Resources, which is based in the USA. And last year we launched a new regional node for Latin America. We changed our name. Last year we were called Open Education Consortium, this year Open Education Global, and part of that has been to emphasize the global focus we have, but also part of it has been around integrating the family of websites that we have for all of these activities under a common brand and identity, as you can see here on the left. And on the right, you see a screenshot actually of our LATAM regional node, and one of the things we're proud of is that our regional nodes are done in the local language. So in this case, the regional node is entirely in Spanish. We just did Open Education Week, March 2nd through 6th. We had this is a top little piece of screenshot of the summary report that we just published, but we had over 6,000 participants from 121 countries and had events being conducted in 14 different languages. That kind of breadth of participation and representation and also support for language is something we're really proud of and feel that that's a valuable service that we look to continue to build out with all of our other events. This is a snapshot of what took place at our global conference last year in Milan, Italy. We again had a lot of people from around the world, lots of different tracks, pedagogies, strategies, practices. Those were the 3 big tracks in terms of enabling people to quickly get familiar with what's going on in each of those areas. And again, we had a pretty good representation in terms of participation from people all around the world. We're really delighted last year to have about 40 students participating in that conference because we feel that the student voice is often underrepresented, and we're looking to highlight and engage students way more than we historically have. This year, the global conference was intended to happen in Taiwan, and we've launched the website, but of course are cautious about whether it will really be able to happen on the 20th to the 22nd of November. We hope that it will be, but of course with the coronavirus, it's difficult to be sure. We're still waiting and allowing a little bit of time to pass, but in the background, we're developing a plan B, which might provide us with an opportunity to still host the conference, even if we can't do it in person in Taiwan. The Open Education Awards, I wanted to highlight this because this has actually been a really popular part of what we do. Every year we give out awards to people who are doing exceptional work in the open education space. And these are the kinds of awards we give out: individual awards, student awards, and then a set of awards related to open education resources and another set of awards related to tools and practices. These have been quite popular, and as was mentioned by Willem, Asuka Academy has been an award winner. I think many people really appreciate being acknowledged for the great work that they're doing, and it often then provides them with the basis for applying for funding, for example, to do even more. Our LATAM node is made up of 10 different Latin American countries. I thought I'd share just briefly what their focus is. They're focused on policy to support open education, so getting governments and institutions to adopt policy supporting open education, focused on teacher education, research, and infrastructure, and then developing and generating reports for each of the regions in which open education is happening. And the US regional node is much larger, 34 states, 90 members. It's very active, and they have an awesome community of practice that supports grassroots people with professional development activities of all kinds. in addition to all those things, we do some special projects. I'm not going to go into them in any great detail, but last year we supported Open Education for a Better World, which was an online mentoring program for open education. We also participated and co-hosted the Open Education Policy Forum, which was done in Warsaw. And we also partnered on the inaugural launch of a new event called the Open EdTech Global Festival, which took place in Barcelona. And all of those were really our efforts to join in with others, to partner with others around supporting open education in all these ways. We continue to try to build out more member-to-member collaborations like you see on the right. And then lastly, this is the last thing I wanted to mention. At the end of last year in November, UNESCO, all 193 member states of UNESCO agreed to adopt something that's called the Open Education Resources Recommendation. This recommendation has four main areas of action, one around capacity building, one around policy, one around inclusive, equitable access, and lastly, one around sustainable models. There's a fifth action area, which is around international cooperation to support these things. And as part of that, I've been leading an effort to form a network of organizations, many whose logos are on this slide, to support the implementation of this recommendation around the world. I think this is the first time a major instrument of this kind has been adopted by so many countries around the world, and I think it provides a real boost to the adoption of education, and we're looking to enable and support its implementation going forward. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my team. This is the whole team that actually works with me to do all the things that you just heard we do. It's a small team, but we are mighty. And these are some great people, a really great team. I've been thrilled to have them and doing some great work with them. And this is where I live in Vancouver. This is the view out my window. It's dark now, otherwise I'd show you, but it's been a delight to give this presentation for you from Vancouver, and I hope you found it of interest and useful. And that's it for me, Katsu.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. So thank you for your presentation. That's amazing. So, so you introduce broader landscape of oil practice and research with a metaphor of biological ecosystem. It is great. So thank you, Paul. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So, and thank you again for your participation in midnight in the Canada time.
Yes, it's late here. Yeah.
Thank you. So if you could have a little short time, we could have time for the Q&A. Is it possible?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. So, okay, I switch to Japanese. ポール先生、ありがとうございました。このように短い時間、また真夜中にもかかわらずですね、オープンエデュケーショングローバルの活動、また世界における、オープンエデュケーションの、実践ですとか、またオープンエデュケーションに関わる研究の動向について、幅広くご紹介いただいたかと思います。時間は若干過ぎているんですが、せっかくの機会で、ポール・ステイシー氏もぜひとおっしゃっていただいていますので、何かもし皆様の方からご質問等ありましたら受け付けたいと思います。チャットの方に書いていただいても結構ですし、もし直接お話になりたいという方がいらっしゃいましたら、ミュートを解除して、日本語でも英語でも構いませんので、ぜひご発言いただければと思います。いかがでしょうか。So, Paul, I'm just asking the question for the participants. And if you like, may I start the question from me?
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, my question is about based on your metaphor of the biological ecosystem.
Yeah.
It is great. So we should grown up that. So what's the point if we want to maintain or sustain or grow up this ecosystem? What's important for us? What should we focus on?
I think there's a need to focus on two things simultaneously. One thing is, and let me just say, the two things really are, we've had some grassroots adoption of open education sort of at the ground, right, by people like you and by other teachers and faculty around the world. what's often been missing, though, is that top-level support from either government or senior administration within an institution. And so, although the grassroots activity has been successful, it still has not gone mainstream. So there's a lot more work to be done at that level to kind of convince our colleagues that this is worthy, that the benefits are substantial, that there is sufficient motivation and reward for engaging in it. And some of that motivation and reward needs to come from above. We need to ensure that our senior administrators, our government, is backing open education and is encouraging it by providing appropriate policy incentives and motivation for people to engage in it. That can take many different forms at that high leadership level, and many of those forms are actually spelled out quite nicely in the UNESCO OER recommendation. So I think that that's been a missing piece, that top-level part. I think we're going to see more activity there, and I'm looking to see that activity really nurture and help the grassroots activity flourish, because we really will get great things happening if we get both those things happening concurrently. Otherwise, the grassroots stuff runs into a barrier because sometimes the way incentives and participation and reward and policy are structured at that high level creates barriers and creates problems for open education to flourish.
Great. So the kind of the collaboration combination of top level or the bottom level is very important. Yep. So we could find some role in the regional community to grow up that.
Yes, for sure.
Great.
I think that's absolutely right. So I'm currently doing a lot of work at the institutional level, and I think one of the things that's going to happen is that work's going to also become increasingly at that government level. Been doing a lot of work at the government level around policy, but I think there'll be a lot more work happening there in all of the other action areas of the UNESCO OER recommendation.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay, I switch to Japanese. では、どうですかね。皆さんご質問ともしありましたらお願いします。今のところよろしいですか。わかりました。それではもし、ポール・ステイシー氏に聞きたいことございましたら、最後にアンケートがございますので、そういったところで事後的にもお答えしたいと思います。Okay, Paul, we do not have a question so far, but if we have that, we will send you later and please respond that.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sure. Please do that. I'd love to hear any questions and engage with people.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I appreciate that for your effort and your participation itself. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So, okay, so we disconnect now and we switch to the short break and go to the next session.
Okay.
So, では、
Enjoy the rest of your event.
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much. では、ポール先生、ありがとうございました。
Bye-bye.
はい。